this could have been the main event, right? If you talk Robbie Lawler and Ben Askren, this was expected to be a main event. When they announced it, they was like, all right, the main event's done, and they put 2 title fights on top of it. But this still may be the most scrutinized fight on the card. Askren comes in favored over Lawler. Lawler, the former champion, a real hard hat of a veteran, you know what I mean? It's like, they didn't do him many favors giving him Bobby Lawler. If Bobby Lawler comes in as prepared as Bobby Lawler can get for this fight, then I don't know if this shouldn't be a lot closer on the odds. How do you see this one?
Well, if Covington's the most hated fighter in the UFC, Robbie Lawler might be the most loved. Him and Cerrone are the ones that I can think of. The thing with Robbie Lawler is he went through that great championship run when he had the great first title fight with Johnny Hendricks that he lost the decision. He had the second decision win. The second fight they had, he won the decision. Then he had that just easily one of the top 5 greatest fights in UFC history, maybe the greatest title fight, up there with Gus and Jones and others, with Rory McDonald, a fantastic fight. Then he had another classic fight with Carlos Condit. That man was in so many wars in about a 4-year period. And at one point I was saying, you know, Robbie Lawler's he can't take these kind of fights too long. And then he met up with Woodley, who is just such a powerhouse, so fast, and Woodley got a lot. That was the build-up for that fight seemed a little lackluster compared to the other Lawler fights at that point. And Lawler had already been through so much wars. Woodley was fresh. Woodley called for that fight for a long time, and Woodley shut the lights out in 2 or 3 minutes. And since then, we've seen Lawler come back. He got a decision win over Donald Cerrone, and then he lost a decision to RDA. He doesn't seem the same to me, but he's had some time off to heal up, some much-needed time off. But when we look at Ben Askren, a lot of UFC fans that just strictly follow him, that have MMA synonymous with the UFC, and the UFC is just MMA to them, that's all they watch. They're unfamiliar with Askren because this is his UFC debut, but this guy has been for a long time maybe the best fighter outside of the UFC. He's been the champion in 1 championship. He was the champion in Bellator. He's not a very exciting fighter, which is why Dana didn't want him for a long time, but he's one of those type of guys that if he gets his hands on you, he's such a high-level wrestler and high-level grappler that he gets you to the mat, and it's just he's so good there that you just can't stop it. He's kind of like a bigger Khabib, and I like this fight. I'm going to be pulling for Lawler because I've always really appreciated Robbie. I really like Robbie, but they're bringing this fight in as a fight to try to get Askren in the win column because they can do a lot of big things with him, including, since I don't believe in the George St. Pierre narrative at all, I still believe that that's a possibility for an inaugural 65 title fight would be Askren and GSP. I think it would sell.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot going on. I think you're right, absolutely. By picking Lawler, they're picking a nice feather for Askren to put in his cap to start off his career. It's the right move. The bottom line is you just went through Lawler's laundry list of fights in the UFC, all wars. You know what? The guy had tons of miles before he got to the UFC for this last run. His Strikeforce fights with Jacare and, losses to guys like Jason Miller in the past, Tim Kennedy. He fought Matt Leland, Babalu Sobral. These were fights at 185 pounds. So coming down to 170, the guy definitely is one of the true warriors of the last decade. You know what I mean? For sure, a decorated guy, and he deserves all the credit he gets. All the run he had with the UFC afterwards, hopefully he banked his money, put it away, because Robbie Lawler to me is a superhero. But here, they're giving him a tall order because at the end of the day, too, with Askren off to the side in Bellator, he doesn't even have a lot of common opponents with people where you can say, how does he match up here or how does he do well with this guy? I mean, Michael Korkishov, I don't, who's he fought over there that has equal names on the resume and stuff like that. He went away from Bellator before the migration of all that. His best win, maybe Shinya Aoki, a 155-pounder at the end of the day. So we're going to find out more for him. If he isn't what they say he is, Lawler could eat his lunch. But I think, when he's 18-0, he's got a lot of hype. And there's also the X factor with Askren in that you hear from people in the business, and you've heard from a long time, that he is all that he is a blanket grappler, that as a wrestler you can put him in with jiu-jitsu guys and he doesn't get lost and trapped and caught, that he's adapted real well. On the grappling end, you're talking about an ace all the way through. On the striking end, if Lawler gets to land and gets him confused, I think you'll see him unravel fast, and that may be his weakness. So we'll see. Very interesting fight, Dev. How do you see it?
Well, probably the fight that I think is actually the best win that Askren has on his career was he beat Douglas Lima in Bellator before he left. And I think Lima's the closest that we have to a fighter like Lawler to compare to, and it was pretty impressive. I mean, I remember seeing the interview that Rogan did with Askren, where Rogan brought that up. Like, he was like, I didn't believe in you until I saw you fight Douglas Lima. And he's like, and you did the exact same thing you did to him that you do to everybody. And Douglas Lima is a killer. Douglas Lima is about to fight MVP in the semifinal of the welterweight Grand Prix. He's a very good fighter, and that was impressive. And I actually heard an interview with the One Championship president, because they just signed that TNT deal. He did an interview on Ariel Helwani's show, and he was talking about, they brought up, Helwani is one of the few journalists that's willing to ask the tough questions. He brought up the trade for Mighty Mouse Johnson and Ben Askren, and the One president said something he was like, I felt like we've had the best welterweight in the world for a long time, and I know we do, because he's like, I've seen personally Askren in the gym with very notable champions in the UFC. He's like, I'm not going to mention any names, but he's like, I think you know who I'm talking about. He was like, and he just ragdolls them. And it was very easy to know who he's talking about. He's teammates with Tyron Woodley, and he's a welterweight, which is even more interesting. If they both win, they're not going to fight each other. They both come out and said, I'm not going to fight each other. And Woodley's even been on record, and Woodley's a very brash, arrogant type of fighter. I mean, he's very proud of himself. He calls himself the GOAT, even with GSP. You know, in his legacy, he says, I'm the greatest welterweight ever. He's even been on record saying, I'm not going to fight Askren. Askren's my coach. He's my wrestling coach. And if he's really that good, it's going to be interesting. But the thing I want to throw at you real quick, Miguel, is we've talked on the CRP, because right now you've got 125, 135, 145, 155. And then you got this weird 15-pound jump between 55 and 70 to 85. I've thought forever that it would make more sense for them to move welterweight to 175 and open up a 65-pound division, especially considering that those two weight classes have the most talent in them. And now you finally have two guys who might be the two best welterweights in the world in the same organization, who are teammates, saying they won't fight each other. And Askren's been coming out saying, I'm going to be the 65 champ. What do you think the chances are, if Woodley wins, Askren wins, that Askren's going to have enough pull to finally force the UFC to make that move, to move welterweight to 75 and open up that 65 division with Askren for a title fight?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it's intriguing as hell, and I think all the talk is always good for MMA, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Does Askren have the pull? And the answer to me, if I'm the UFC, the truth is that the decision here lies with the boxing commissions. The UFC could decide that they want to enforce other weight classes and force people's hands and stuff, but the unified rules would need to change across the boxing commissions to adapt to new weight classes, right? So I think that that's a difficult thing. And the bottom line is does Askren have the pull? No fighter should have the pull. That stuff should happen over reviews and stuff. So what happens next time if you have another fighter? So I think it's a tall order to change the weight classes on a political level, having them established and stuff. Is there room for, fixes and wiggle room in boxing and in MMA? The answer is yes.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure the Athletic Commission did approve a 65 division. It's just that the UFC hasn't been willing to open it up. And you're right, though, because what does that do to other organizations like Bellator and stuff? Do they have to follow suit? Do they have to dissolve their 175-pound division and make it 75 and 65? Of course, it would make more sense to see 125 to 185 with 10-pound differences in the weight classes. I think that makes the most sense. It's just they got stuck in there because 170 was such a big division, headlined by guys like Matt Hughes and George St. Pierre for so long, and they're kind of grounded in those divisions. But that 15-pound gap, there's a lot of guys people like Kevin Lee that I can think of that really struggle to make it down to 55 but are not big enough for 70. Then you got Kelvin Gastelum, who's a little small at 85 but a little too big for 70. It'd be great to see them do that. I would think that Askren would be the prime candidate for that division if they were to open that up. I'm not sure it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen eventually. I just don't know if it's going to be because of Askren, but I think it's got to.
The thing about Askren is that he brings a combination of being an athlete, but also being an outspoken spokesperson type of guy. Even when he wasn't with the UFC, he had no problem giving his opinion and laying it out on the line there. So if anybody's got a chance of getting it done, it might be a guy like Askren, especially if he puts together a couple of big wins, right? So we'll see how it goes there. And that's an interesting talk. I think we should take it up in another podcast because in boxing, too, you've got kilograms and things like that, which sometimes add up nicely. But at the end of the day, boxing, after 175 pounds, just has 2 weight classes. So boxing's a mess all in and of itself. And, once you get down to the lower weight classes, the UFC's trying to do away with weight classes. And, that's not the way to go either. So I think that's a great conversation for another podcast.